All right, so the last class we did few script, right? Last two classes, we just talked about how to automate and we learned very basic. We did few automation script, we wrote few test cases, but we didn't really talk about how to choose a selector, how to create a selector, and what are the selector that are available to us. So when I say selector, that is called locator, right? If you're using Selenium, then that will be locator. And one of the important interview question is, what kind of locator have you used, right? So let me just go ahead and all right, so locators. So what are some of the locators that is available to us, right? The number one we can talk about is ID, right? Number two, we can talk about name. Number three, we can talk about, let's say, class name. Number four is link text. 5, link text. Number 6 is CSS selector. Number 7 is, let's say, XPath. Correct, kicked in, okay. And number 8, DOM, and we'll talk about that, HTML, DOM. So these are the 7 items that are available to you when you do automation, right? So what is, let's ask one of you guys, which one would be your first choice, right, when you are automating? Who wants to answer that question? And if you are wrong, don't worry about it, I'll correct you. Anybody wants to answer this question? Which selector we will go ahead and use?
I think we can use either of them, but most probably for this website, we have been using the name mostly.
But which one that you would personally use? Like, how do you determine which one to use? I know, like, you got a whole bunch of stuff and any of them will work, let's say, but which one would you personally choose?
I would personally choose XPath.
Okay, what would be the reason?
Because I think it would be more accurate, and if you can create the like, what is called?
Okay, more accurate, but that may not be the full answer, right? Okay, so for example, you have this element and you want to write on it. Okay, you wanna use send keys method. First, you have to locate this element. In order to locate, we need, what do we need? We need a locator for that element, right? So remember how we write this? Driver dot find element, and then we do y, and then we have to use any of these, right? So in this case, which would be your choice here for the name, first name?
I'd go for the inspect element, and I would choose the name in here. It's called the app.
So you would choose name over ID. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
What is the reason?
I think it would be much easy.
So name and ID looks like, okay, so the first thing
These
first,
two are the same, but still, you know that
it's not the same. So let's talk about this, right? When you are looking into an element, you're inspecting right now, right? So we are inspecting right now this element, and the first thing first, we have these available selectors that we can use, but then this specific selector has only 2 items that Selenium recognizes. Selenium knows these things, right? So it looks like name and ID both is available as a tool that you can use in order to select that element. Now, what you need to do, you need to make sure that if his an ID is unique, if his a name is unique, because if this ID belongs to another element, it will not work. right? If this name belongs to another element, it will not work. So now what is the general convention? When a developer writes their code and they create an ID, generally the ID is meant to be unique. So you can probably take the word for it and say, okay, you know what, ID is unique, I will use the ID. So ID should be your first choice, because why? Because ID has a norm to be unique, right? Now, with the latest technology, with the new technologies that they're using, the ID always comes with some sort of complexity, like for example, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this number is auto-generated. So every time you refresh, the ID comes with a dynamic number that will change every time you refresh. Therefore, if you use the ID, it may not work. It will not work actually. Now, the name is known to be not unique, meaning for an element, what they do is that if there was two kind of element at the same time, they would name them same. So we know for a fact the name may or may not be unique, right? You guys understand what I'm talking about? Like if he's unique or if he's not unique. So if the name element is unique and you know it, then you can use the name. All right. If the ID is unique and you know it and you refreshed, this number didn't change, then you can use it. But I would first choose ID because the ID is known to be unique, right? This is a convention. Otherwise, if it's not unique, it changes all the time, it's dynamic, then we have to think about something else. What else can we use? Because ID is not usable. So for example, let's say name doesn't even exist here. Then we would have to use ID, but we have to use partial ID, meaning we use up to this much, and the numbers we will be ignoring. And that is, we're going to be talking about how to write dynamic XPath or CSS selector, because by itself, ID cannot just, cannot be used without these numbers. But yes, there is a way to do that, which is regular expression. So we'll talk about multiple ways to overcome this type of challenges. So in the order in which I put it, you can pretty much say, okay, I would use ID if it's unique. If not, then I would use name. If name is not unique, then I will use class name. But these are available things, right? But a company or a team may choose to use XPath all the time. A team can choose to use CSS all the time. Is because they are, when you have an ID and name, you can easily create a simple CSS selector or XPath. And that's the way that the team works, right? So you go into a team and you see that your team has a coding standard, and they said any selector that you're creating or any selector that you're using, it should be CSS selector. That's it, period. So CSS selector can be created out of any of these elements that we can see, or selectors. This can be converted into CSS selector without any problem. So therefore, why not just only use CSS selector? You know what I'm saying? Same thing, XPath. Any of these can be converted into an XPath. Therefore, why not use only XPath? So many teams just make sure your mind is open, because it can be like, okay, we'll use whatever is available versus we will use only XPath. We can convert these guys if they're available to us as a XPath. So it depends on the team. It depends who's writing the code, and depends who's enforcing the rules in the team. Okay. So now if let's say you want to save some time, right? You want to be a tester, or at least test engineer who doesn't want to just run the whole script and find out that the ID is not unique or something, right? Or the ID doesn't work. So how do you do the testing? The testing can be done directly within your find element. So if you're on this is your this is the element that I just selected. As you can see, if I click on it, it's highlights. So I'm going to do Command F from my computer if you're a Mac, but if you are Windows, you're going to do Windows button and F, or the Control and F, right? And you're supposed to see something like this. If you're using Chrome, you're going to see then find by string selector or XPath. If you see this, that means this is a tester. This can help you test and identify if you have the right selector or not, right? So for example, IDs, how do I know if this is unique? All I have to do is, for an ID, anytime I input an ID and I put, let's say, a hashtag in front of it, it becomes a CSS selector. So in this case, like look how can you do the testing. It can test string, it can test selector or XPath. So you cannot just simply put ID here and think that it'll test it. But also if you put the ID by itself, then it will test only string. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that we're testing the CSS selector or XPath. Okay. So a ID, just note this, any ID that you see, as long as the ID is equal to this, not like, let's say, something like this. If you see any custom, like let's say test ID, something like this, that is not an ID. It should be just ID. If the ID is this, that means this is the attribute and this is the value, right? Then you take the value, you put a hashtag in front of it, and you take the value. Let me just edit this. We don't need this. And you take the value and you go ahead and insert, right? That becomes immediately that becomes a CSS selector. Okay. Now, if I want to do the same thing using XPath, all I have to do /, meaning I want to search the entire HTML DOM, right? The entire HTML DOM, double search. And then I want to say I'm looking for input as an element, input. So I'm going to say input. Okay. And then I want to say input, I want to find it by is ID. So I'm going to go ahead and put a open square bracket and close square bracket. I'm going to say at ID is equal to, and I'm going to put a double quote, and I'm going to say FNAME, right? This is the F name, right? ID. So now this XPath is working, correct? This is a working XPath. This XPath we just created ourselves. Now, what if you don't know if it's an input or something else? So you go ahead and remove this, and you go ahead and put a star. That means it will search everything, every single tag. So this called a tag, right? You see, open tag and close right there. So TD is a tag, TR is a tag, Tbody is a tag, table is a tag, input is a tag. Now, if you don't want to specify what type of element that is, because this is an input type element, input meaning it takes something, right? So if you don't want to specify that, then you can put a star front of the XPath. So again, / meaning we want to look for the whole entire, right? The whole page. Okay. That is relative path. / means a relative path. You do / is absolute. That means you know exactly where that is. We don't use that too much. Okay. We use / and say, okay, I'm going to search for everything. And then I want to do, let's say, at ID is equal to F name, close, done. And we have ourselves an XPath. Now, compared to that, if I right click and copy and I click on copy XPath, let's see how that shows up. It's exactly the same, right? It's exactly the same. Now, this may be something that you get lucky with, where you get an XPath that exactly how we create ourselves, right? But then there will be times where XPath is going to be like crazy, right? So for example, name and ID does not belong to this input. Then the XPath is going to be pretty much crazy. It doesn't look good. It'll be extensive. It'll be very long. And it'll also be fragile, meaning the XPath will not work if something changes here, right? This is the element, but then if something changes here, the XPath doesn't work. So that's how fragile the XPath can get when you are just choosing your, when you are getting it directly from the browser itself. Okay. And that's why we create XPath ourselves. Now let's talk about CSS selector. So everybody's clear on XPath, how to create it, and what is / versus relative /. And everything else. Okay, let me just go in. Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time with CSS and XPath today, right? Anybody has a question using with these locators, right? These three I'm going to explain a bit more. I'm going to dive into it to make sure everybody gets it. But any question under this selectors or locators? I call selectors, I call locators, the same thing in my view, but locators is probably the conventional way of naming this, right? So because everybody that is a Java developer, everybody that uses Selenium, they will say locator. The reason I say selector is because I come from Ruby background. So I do Ruby, And in Ruby, we call them selectors. So that's why I sometimes say selector, sometimes say locator. Now, my question to you guys, ID is clear, name is clear, right? You guys are fine. Class name is clear, and link text is clear, and then link partial link text is also clear, right? So partial link text is pretty much, if this is a link, you, instead of choosing the whole line, you're choosing like up to this much or something, right? In order to select an element. So any question? Any question up to 5, number 5? All right, silent means you guys really understood and we're good to go, okay? Okay, so now that we learned how to create our own XPath, right? So let's dive in more into XPath before we go into CSS selector, because I'm going to teach you how to create your own CSS selector, how to create your own XPath. So who here has a little bit of idea about XPath? How do we create and things like that? Okay, seems like nobody. So, oh, sorry, my Chrome just crashed. 1 second, I'll gotta open that again. Okay, so XPath is it's not just you guys can still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Insurance demo website. Okay, that's where we're supposed to be. Okay. So let's say you want to choose something from here, right? Let me just go into something. Let's say you want to click on this thing, right? But you want to use an XPath that will say anything that has home insurance code request. I want to click on it, right? So in XPath, there is some built-in functions that we can use, okay? XPath has built-in functions. For example, if let's expand this right here, because why XPath is favorable, why people want to use XPath, and why is it like everybody thinks that XPath is better than the other locators, is because XPath, not only XPath can use these guys, right, within, but also it has more flexibility, right? One of the flexibilities is that it has built-in function. Built-in functions will allow you to do certain things. But before that, let me just put things that we already talked about here, right? So one of the things that we talked about is absolute path. Absolute XPath. So oh goodness. Okay. The SOLUTE. Try to autocorrect my XPath. So what is absolute XPath? We just described, right? And what is a relative XPath, right? That's a good question because this is an interview question. So I'm going to just go ahead and ask you guys one more time before moving into our built-in functions, right? How do we use those functions to our advantage? So absolute is pretty much when you know exact location of your locator, right? Absolute contains single slash. So it uses single slash, right? And so the question is like, oh, what is a single slash, right? That's what that's what the interview question is, right? It uses single slash, and it uses pretty much, it's a direct way to find element. And it has some disadvantage compared to relative path. Like imagine you're saying that this is the exact location, something change around it, we're going to have a problem, right? We're going to have a problem. So in with the single slash, let me just go into this. With the single slash, you're saying that don't look for anywhere else but this location only. Okay, don't look for anywhere, which means it will also include some of these element as a tree to map into this location. Now something changes here, your XPath is not going to work. Okay, so when do we use a absolute versus when do we use the relative, right? Relative, we use it when we know for a fact our element is one of a kind in the page, or at least in the section. So if this is the section you're dealing with, it is one of a kind. For example, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 support is one of a kind within this section, right? There is no other support that you can see within this section. Okay, so it's fair to say that we can use relative, right? Now if you are specifically clicking on something, for example, let's say we're clicking on starter code, like make believe this starter code and this starter code is the exact same element, they have the same ID and all that stuff. In this case, you want to distinguish between this one and this one. So you want to basically say, I want to click exactly this one. Therefore, you want to use the absolute path. Okay, so absolute path is, if it's not necessary, we don't use. We only use relative path as much as we can in order to have our test automation less brutal to failure. It doesn't fail just because this section didn't load just yet. The whole page loaded, this section taking 2 seconds extra to load, now your test fails. Okay, so that's what it is, the difference between absolute and relative. Now relative path is pretty much, we are saying that we want to look through the whole DOM, and we want to say, you know, pretty much we want to look into every single tag, HTML tag that is here, and find what we need. Just match, we're pretty much matching. Relative is like we're matching, and absolute when we are just going in there and saying, okay, this is exact location, I want this. And if it's not there, then obviously Selenium is going to say element not found, right? So relative is, let me just go ahead and, is double slash. You are going through the whole, you're iterating through the whole DOM to find what you need. Okay, so these are the two different way of creating XPath. And we already showed you how to create a XPath with the relative double slashes. Okay, the basics of an XPath, the basic structure of an XPath. So let me just go into basics of XPath and how it looks like, and we already did that, so at least we get some idea here. So we get ourselves with double slash, right? And again, single slash it could be, but if you know exactly what it is, then we got ourselves what kind of tag. Input is a tag type, right? As you can see right here. So it could be image, it doesn't have to be input. If I'm looking for this element, I can say img, and then within these two, I have to put whatever that is available to me. So I can, in this case, I can put alt is equal to this, right? And it will work for me. So let's say we want to look for this div. Okay, so the XPath for this div is content wrapper, and this is class, right? So we would do, again, double slash, we're going to say we're looking for div. Remember, div is the, what is the div? Tag, right? Div is the tag, and we're going to say, is this content wrapper, which is, oh, okay. So since this is a class, we're going to say at class, okay, is equal to double quote, and that exact text you have to copy and paste it, because sometimes when you type it in, you may miss the capitalization. So maybe C is uppercase, or maybe W is uppercase, something that you miss, and it will not work. So you just copy and paste it right here. So I'm going to just content WRAPPER, wrapper, right? So this is my XPath. This is the way that I create my XPath, and this is the basic of an XPath. The next thing is what XPath is kind of dynamic for is because, okay, let me just leave that here. There are some functions. For example, there is one function that called contains actually, right? So contains, any times in programming you see these two, usually that is a function, right? That does a very specific thing for you. In this case, XPath contains uses the reason why we use contain is because maybe it doesn't have an ID, maybe it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have anything except for this specific text. Okay, so then contain comes handy because now it doesn't have anything at all. How can we go ahead and identify this element? We're going to use contains, so that way it will find by its content. Okay, so home insurance code is the content, right? So we can actually use contains. So in this case, for example, let's say we're creating an XPath, we can say / and we say find look through whole thing. Okay, look through whole thing. You know what, I'm going to just create it here so we can actually kind of see that how it works. / this find everything. Notice how when I put this, it selects the whole page that is looking through the whole page. Okay, and after that we want to use contains. So contains, and then it takes an argument. Contains takes something. Okay, contains takes an argument. Contain is actually taking what it is. It can be like, let's say, okay, so let me just find this element real quick. Let's say this one right here, it has, let's say, class, right? Contains, I will say at class this, and then I will now have to provide, I'll now have to provide like one of these class. So whenever you see class with a space in between, that means this is a class, this is a class, and this is a class. Okay, that means each one is a class name. This specific element right here has multiple class name. It has 3 different names. One is called button, the other one is button primary, the other one is button error code. So I'm going to go ahead and click this one because this one I'm going to copy it because this one seems to be unique to me, and I feel like this is probably unique, right? And I'll go ahead and put that there, and I believe this should be single quote. Okay, name type. Okay, this tester probably is not working, but this is how it should work for the contains. Contains also have another way of working. So basically contains means like, let's say, oh, okay, awesome, okay, that's good. So let's say, let me give you a better example because this is not a good example. This is just a button, right? So let's say first name. Okay, let's go into the first name, and now some reason first name has these numbers, whatever, right? And this numbers always changes. So how do you use this, right? And that's the only thing is available to you. So what you can do, you can say ID, and then contains will do partial. So you can actually use contain to use the partial ID. So you know the prefix. How many people know what prefix means? Anybody here knows prefix means? Okay, nobody knows, right? Prefix is like when you have something that always have a constant value. For example, fname underscore is the constant of this ID. Only the change, the value that is variable here or changes is this, the number. So when ID has a prefix, when an ID has something that is always remains the same, you can actually use contains because we are saying contains ID and with this, okay? This partial, because you're totally ignoring the rest of it, right? You're saying this is at least the ID should have this much, okay? If that's the case, then go ahead and select that. But unfortunately, what's going to happen is this tester do not work. Do not find it unless it will work on your Selenium script for sure. So contains is something like this. You're basically looking for a specific use case. So now the other thing is that the other thing that I can show you that if it works or not works, let me go into that real quick. Contains really works with another way. For example, let's say instead of ID, we say contains text. Okay, text is another function. And now we have to put the text here, right? So let's say if it contains a text with, let's say, okay, so let's say we're looking for this guy, right? Hurry and submit now. So, and I'm gonna go ahead and copy the text, okay, and go ahead and paste it right here. Okay, so somehow the thing is that it should okay, let me, maybe it's double code needs to be put in there. So this is also going to work. This is another way. So you're saying contains text, which is this, right? And that should definitely work for you to see, for you to basically click on a selector that only has text and it's not a link. Obviously, if this was a link, you could have just used a link text and you would be better off, right? But in this case, let's say nothing else is available, only the text, then you would use contains and text. Okay, contains is a function that allows you to be able to use that. So that is one of the like more advantage compared to these guys, but also there are other advantage. We can use just more than one value and attribute. So contains, but we can also use or and, right? That means you can say, I want ID, I want to match ID and class. Okay, so why do you want to match two different selectors or two different locators? So let's say you want to say, if something has name and ID, then I would like to click on it. So the way that you write your XPath, you're going to say find / find everything that has, okay, that has, let's say, at ID is equal to F name, right? And it has a name is equal to, so in this case, this becomes end. Okay, so the comparison, like pretty much end operator, has to find both true in order to say I found it. Now, if you use or, if you're gonna use or, then either one is going to be fine. So if it matches ID, then it will work. If it matches name, then it will also work. Okay, so that's another flexibility for you with the XPath. Okay, you can use more than one way. So you get the picture here, right? Or it matches only one, either one matches is fine, and has to match both. Okay, that is nothing new. If you did the class with Java, you will know that this is an operator that is true for any programming language, right? And in this case, XPath, even XPath uses or an end. So we should be fine with that. All right, what else XPath can? The XPath has another built-in function, which is called starts with. All right, starts with function allows you to pretty much find something that starts with something. So for example, let's say this find everything, and then at ID, right, is equal to, and pretty much starts with, let's say, you have to provide this, okay, right there, starts with, in the function itself, starts with ID, and then you would then provide the value of the ID. Now, you don't have to provide full ID. You can provide the partial ID. So it starts with will at least look for, let's say, for in this case, the ID is F name, right? We can say FNAM. We're missing E, right? Oh, FNA. We're missing ME. This will still work, right? Unless if it finds multiple matches, then Selenium will say we found ambiguous element, meaning it has more than one that matches with the same criteria. Okay, so then in this case, you have to be more specific. So M, and then you try again and it will work. Okay, so we learned so far starts with, we learned contains, we learn double and single slash for XPath. Let's see what else that we have as a function. We learned also text, right? So text is right here. Text pretty much matches the text. When you see something like this, that is a text. This is not a value or not attribute. When you see it like this, that is a text, okay, for this guy. So in this case, you can use the text. Let's go into ancestor. So sometime what happens is that you want to find an element based on his parent, right? So if you have, let's say, let me find something better. Like Go 99 definitely has it. So I'll go into this. So now if you click on this, right, testing is the parent and these are the child, right? So you want to find it by looking into testing and say testing, the number one item I want to find. Okay, you don't even know what number one item is, or better yet, testing and I want to find this the let's say the third one, Selenium. Testing and I want to find the third one, which is the child. This is the parent. So in this case, you're gonna have to use the ancestor. Ancestor is another way that XPath provides its way to find different element. So you guys have to kind of like try this at home, otherwise you're never gonna be able to. Let me just go ahead and actually show you what I mean, but you guys have to kind of try this or you're never going to remember that, right? So no matter how many times we are going over this thing, you're not going to remember it. So let's say double slash everything, and then we say text. So we're using the text function in this case is equal to, let's say, let me see, Selenium has, okay, it doesn't expand. Okay, and then okay, so then we have to see what it is, right? We have to find like the whole thing. What is the whole thing is all about? So go into that first, and we know that this is a div. Within the div is this, which is ID Java Technologies, right? So we click on Java Technologies, we copy that, but we can also find testing, right? So right here, this is the testing. So because you're using text, we can say testing, but in this case, if we use ID, then we would just use this. So we're using the text. We're gonna go ahead and find it by the ID, sorry, by the text itself, and we're gonna close it. Somehow it is not working. So let me see what is the actual text of this. Sometimes it's different. As you can see, like lowercase, right? So we have to go with this, not the uppercase. Okay, so now it's working. Okay, so you have to go by what you see here, because the way it shows on the front end, it is manipulated by our CSS. Therefore, you cannot just take the way it looks. So now testing has, you see, like testing definitely has more than one, right? So if I click on it, it iterates through different elements. Therefore, this is ambiguous, right? So now, in this case, if I want to use ancestor, I can do double slash, I can write ancestor, and then I can do the div, and as you can see, it is finding the divs within, but again, this testing is not unique. So what I will do, I will probably use end before that. So in order to make this unique XPath, I will have to say end, right? And I will say at ID is equal to, and I will provide the ID. It's probably better off doing that because unfortunately that is not unique. So I can use the end IDs, right? But, or I can use the IDs all together. I don't even need the text. Okay, so this is, you see, this is how it's selecting everything. Java Technology is selecting everything. That's the problem, right? So now if I want to stick to this guy, all I have to do is use index value, right? So index is 0 or 1. There we go. Oh, still. So indexing also not working because it's selecting all of it, right? So our intention is to select only this section. testing section. So Java technologies, unfortunately, this ID belong to everywhere, right? So this is a good example of not relying just on ID, right? And all of them have classes menu, okay? So how do we just focus on the, right? So now we're gonna say end, right? And we're gonna say, text, and text is equal to single quote, testing. This should work, right? Because that's what we are doing. We're doing exactly. Okay, let me just go ahead and to make sure that we're using the exact text. Otherwise, double quotation, sometime like single quotation should work for our script. But here, when we do the testing, we want to make sure that we're following what this guy is expecting. So for some reason, it's okay. So let me see. Or okay. Wow, or is working. So, but then we don't have the end that is supposed to work. And it's not working. Okay. So, and the end is not working. No. All right, let me just quickly see why is it not working. Okay, this okay. Text. Okay, so if I don't do the text, then I should use something else. Okay, in this case, menu. And so there's nothing that I can use to kind of specify what I need to, because as you can see, this only have an ID and menu that belongs to more than one class, sorry, more than one of these element. So that's where we have a problem, but we can specify what type of element that is. This is a UL. So at least this much I can do and get rid of this testing actually. And this is a UL, right? So all the ULs are selected. Now, if I do here, if I do text and I do testing, and it has to be, what am I missing? Okay, 1 second. It just worked and now it's not working. Still not finding it. Okay. That's working. I was trying to narrow down to the UL. Okay, so this is div feature. Okay. So this is actually a div, the whole thing. So text seems like when you look for a text, and you're looking for a specific text, the only way it will work if you use the search everything, right? Because that's how the function works. If you want to be specified, it doesn't work, right? So in this case, when you want to select this whole group, there is a problem, right? And this is a good challenge for us to experiment with, because at work, let's say all of these have the same attribute and name. How do you specify only this? Okay, so if you do this one, and testing, as you can see, is going all over the place. But the good way to do this for this one is that if you go into the div, this is the whole div, right? And it has a featured box, column size 1, and this is probably belong to everything, right? So we can't really use this guy. But if you go into the UL, which has Java technologies, so we can use the ID. So go into the ID. Java technologies, and now we are selecting all of it, but we want the first one, right? So if we want the first one, we now have to say something like, I believe, div or indexing. Let's see. ul.menu, but it's still choosing that. Okay. Okay, that is still choosing. And that's it. This is a pretty good challenge there, right? Okay. So software testing. So in this case, the second one of this, if you want to select, right, then you at least have a title that you can go with, right? And you can use the ancestor function within this. But because this, okay, so let's talk about real life case, real life situation. This is what you're dealing with at work, and what do you do in this case, right? So imagine you're testing this website and you have to go through this menu every single day to create a test case. What would be your approach? Your approach should not be, I'm going to bypass this, I'm going to use some sort of hacking, meaning some sort of ways to find, like, for example, right click, copy XPath, and just go ahead and use that. It will work, right? If I copied it, let me show you. And oh, okay, never mind. It will not work because it has more than one, right? But then if you want to select the first one of its kind, you have to provide one, right? This is called indexing. Unfortunately, I cannot show you here because these tester do not work with one, but Selenium works like that. Now, when you do it this way, this is kind of like you're pushing it in there. Like, okay, I want number one, but this is your daily workflow, right? So why not making these more unique, the IDs or the selectors? Then in this case, you go to your developer and say, hey, I know that you have ID, but all of them have the same ID. Can you do one thing for each one of them? Can you provide a unique ID instead? Instead of saying Java underscore technology, can you do Java underscore technology underscore testing underscore SAP underscore AI? And you have to ask them because they will not care about if you can test or if you cannot test. So you have to, as an automation person, you have to say, look, I know I can go ahead and just create a selector by using the custom attribute, right clicking it and finding the XPath, but that is probably not a long-term solution because we're going to go through this all the time. So this page should have absolutely all the selectors that we can rely on. So you have to really ask your team members, say, can you add an ID? So you have to go out to your developer and ask them for an ID. So that pretty much concludes with our XPath, right? Now let's go into the CSS selector because CSS selector has a lot more ways to the CSS selector, and CSS selector is for and as you can see, it has its own so many things that you can do, and one of my personal favorite is CSS selector. And okay, so CSS selector is the next thing that we're talking about. XPath, any questions before we move on to CSS selector? So no question, that means everybody gets it. Okay, let me do a pop quiz of XPath, right? What is a single slash in XPath? Somebody answer. Anybody can remember? We just talked about it. Let me just write the question here. In the meantime, you guys think about it.
Direct way to find element if you know where you want to go.
Okay, so single slash is there is a name for it. We talked about absolute or relative. Which one is that?
Absolute.
Absolute path, right? Okay. And double slash, who wants to answer that?
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's fine.
Search for everything is relative.
Relative, right? You want to find wherever it is in the page, right? Okay. Then we are talking about this function. There is a function for this, and I'm going to keep writing. Somebody decide who wants to answer that. Okay, the next one is starts with. Okay, there's three different pretty important functions that we just talked about, and we have ancestors. Ancestor, I'll not even put it here, but ancestor is something that you want to experiment with and understand, because no matter what I explain to you, you will not understand how ancestor works. But let's talk about these two, these three. One of you guys talk about what starts with does, contains does, or text does before we go into CSS selector. If you're in silent, that means you didn't understand. Therefore, everybody else, whoever explains, that means you understood. So you'll have another opportunity by somebody else to explain. Therefore, you'll understand this time around. That means nobody understood what text does, contains does, or starts with does. Is that correct? All right.
Can you please repeat again?
Okay, that's fine. So wanted to see how many people actually got it. So text can be used with contains, right? Meaning you want to find an element that has a specific text, right? You can use specific text, or you can say contains text. Okay, so you can use something like this, / relative path, right? / find all the, again, this means all of the tag within HTML. And then you want to say that you want to find it by, let's say, contains, and then you can say text. Okay, this contains a text, and then you can say it contains, like, let's say, for example, like sign up now. This is the specific text that you were looking for. If that is the thing, then you want to select, right? That means in this XPath, you're being as relative as possible, because / you're saying find search everything. Star means all the tag. It doesn't have a specific tag. So in this case, maybe you want to be specific about this, right? Everything is fine, but you can say I want input, right? But anyway, when you use text, what I notice is that it has to be star. Otherwise, sometime it doesn't work. So I would go with star. But if you know it's specific, then you can try that. If it doesn't, then you can use star. Then you say contains, meaning it looks for, it doesn't have to be the whole text. You can just remove this and it will still work for sign up, as long as it doesn't match with something else. Okay, so, and text will pretty much is just that. Okay, this is the text that you are specifying, but contains is that you're saying that it's not the whole thing, but and as long as it contains this specific text, we are good to go. So I explained both at the same time. Starts with, you're saying that ID that starts with something, right? So you're not providing the full ID. You're saying, okay, the ID starts with, let's say, sign. Okay, let's in this case, sign, and then up, and then maybe the ID in reality has your all this, but you're not including that. You're saying starts ID starts with sign up, and then numbers it doesn't really care about it, as long as it finds an ID with matching this many thing starts with, then it will still select that element for you. So far so good. All three, we're all clear, right?
Yes.
Good. Next is CSS selector. CSS selector is, and again, like in this class, you're learning the selectors or learning the locators, which is one of the important thing if you're going into automation, because you could be spending 3 days trying to automate something and it's not working. Is because why? Because your locators is kind of not working, or you don't understand how locator works. Now, CSS selector is my personal favorite because it can do absolutely everything that a XPath does. It just doesn't have all these crazy things that you're looking at, right? Slashes, stars, and these stuff. It doesn't have it. It's pretty easy to read. But another good quality of CSS selector is that it is faster than XPath. Okay, so imagine you have like maybe 5,000 test cases, and all of them using CSS selector. It will be at least saving maybe an hour. I don't know if it's an hour. It could be saving you half an hour out of your entire length of execution time. So CSS selector, it is faster, but you can say expect is easy to understand. A lot of people understand expect because high usage. People use expect a lot, especially people that are coming into Selenium with Java. And CSS selector seems to be more mysterious to a lot of people because they don't study it, or they don't go into it, or maybe in workplace XPath is more used. But for me, I use CSS selector as much as I can. So let's look at it. I'll give you guys some of my ways that I deal with CSS selector. Obviously, we have all kind of references that are here in W3 that you can look into. But any CSS selector class starts with a dot will be a CSS selector. So if a class name is equal to, like, for example, like this class is equal to intro, as long as you put a dot front of intro, it is a CSS selector. It doesn't need the double quotation. So let me show you how it works. So let me go into some sort of website that have classes, right? So let's see. Okay, this one have class, right? So now if we are looking into this, hurry and okay. So sign up button 1, right? I'll copy this. Remember, it has 3 different classes. So what did I say? I said if I put a dot front of the class name, it will be a CSS selector. Look, it's working, but it has 2 different both of them with the same class. You see, SFS button 1, SFS button 2. Now both of them have 3 different 3 classes for each, 3 different name. So now if I want to distinguish between this one to this one, all I have to do is add primary, because this is the primary and this is the success button. This is green. So I will take the primary, I will copy that, and I will put another dot front of it. Boom, edit, and now it's selecting only 1. Okay, this is, so we're using class name to create a CSS selector, which looks like this. And done. It's a very easy CSS selector. So this is how it looks like. Any question? That is, if it's a class name, we put a dot front of it to make it a CSS selector. Again, as I said, when you look into a class name and it has a space, that means it is a separate class name. So button is a class name, button primary is a class name, and SFS button 1 is another class name. You got 3. Any one of them will work. But if you choose one and it has more than one matching, then you can choose another one with a dot and make it unique. Okay, make it a unique selector. Now, what happens if you have an ID, and how do you make a CSS selector of an ID? Anytime you find an ID, you take the value, not the attribute. Okay, you take the value, you copy it, and anytime you put a hashtag in front of it, it becomes a CSS selector right away. Boom, done. It is a CSS selector. You can also see how the browser is trying to help you, but this is a CSS selector. And you see how it looks right there. Okay, so I'm gonna just write some notes here. Maybe I'll share this with you guys later. So any class name with class name can be converted into a CSS selector by using a dot front of it, right? And in this case, we've got 2 class name. We're putting dot right in front of them to combine both in order to find our element that we are looking for. This is an ID. We know ID may be unique, therefore we used the hashtag in front of it, and we're able to. So any ID with can be, okay, let's say can be converted to CSS selector by using hashtag in front of it. Okay. Now this is going to be a very high usage. Now another one, right? Another one is that, and that is my personal favorite, is that sometime you will see that developer are using, like, for example, type is equal to submit, right? And you want to use type, but Selenium does not recognize type because none of them are here, right? We talked about it. So let's say you want to create the CSS selector by using an attribute and value that is not recognized, right, by Selenium. So what you can do is that you take the attribute and value, so in this case type and submit, and you put them inside of a square brackets, and they will automatically become a CSS selector. So let me show you how it works first, right? Copy, and you paste it and put them inside. Now this is a CSS selector. Okay, so now you put CSS selector custom and attribute. Attribute can be into CSS selector, and this is a very good tool because this is something that I use all the time, right? CSS selector by using this guys, right? Square bracket, sorry.
Jill, a quick question. What does mean SFS? You write down over there SFS.
Can you repeat the question? Your voice was very low.
What does mean SFS? You write down.
Oh, SFS?
Yes.
I cannot tell you. This is something that whoever built this application, they decided they're gonna name ID of this guy as SFS, right? So it could be something that they're referencing internally. We don't really need to know the meaning of it because this is a value, right? Value is, it can be anything. Anybody can name anything.
Okay.
All right, so now we got the custom attribute, but sometime you're going to see, like, for example, okay, let me just get rid of this. So I'm going to show you guys. So I'm a developer, let's say, right? And what I am doing is I am, in order to help testers, in order to help my QA guys in my team, I am creating custom attribute to help them. So this is how the custom attribute looks like. I'm going to go ahead and edit this, edit as HTML. Okay, so instead of, you see how type is submit, I'm going to create a custom attribute. I'm going to say QA underscore test ID is equal to, and I'm going to say for this, I'm going to give it a nice name. So it's like submit underscore btn, right, button, right? And this is for me to help my testing team, right? That's what I did. I'm a developer and I did this. This is not an ID. It will not work. Selenium does not recognize this, so it will not work. But is this, tell me if you agree with, is this a custom attribute and it has a value? Is this a custom? And many companies, they nowadays they use custom attribute and values because this will not affect anything anywhere in the application, but only help you if you're a QA to automate, right? So now, if we follow this law or this convention, then we can actually use this as a QA. All we need is to use the square bracket and say QA dash test ID is equal to submit button, right? So single quote, you don't even need the single quote. You can just submit underscore BT and it will work. Trust me. I'll show you if it works or not. Okay, so, okay, look, it is finding it. So if the developer is kind enough, or maybe the team recognizes that they need to help QA guys and they're doing it like this, then it's good. If you go to Facebook, you're going to actually see it says test.id, something like that, like, which is custom, because they don't want outside world to use anything to kind of like automate Facebook or something like that, but they also want to automate Facebook in order to test it internally. So you're going to find all over the place something like this. They name it something different, but this is something that I can name whatever I want, right? I can say data ID, and I can do it this way too. And where did it go? Somewhere right here, right? So I can name it this way, whatever they want to name, but this doesn't really affect the code because remember, developers, the ID and the class name is being used by the CSS in order to make it, you know, different color and things like that, right? Now, this value, data ID is equal to submit button, is not being used anywhere but the QA. Therefore, this extra piece of code right here does not impact how the application works. Okay, but it only helps QA guys. So you're gonna see moving forward these ideas that doesn't really do anything but helping QA to automate. So if you're using, let's say, CSS selector, then you can simply use it this way. But if I want to use XPath, what can I use? How can I do this? All I have to do, instead of ID, I just have to put this here as data underscore ID. And now we put this value and it will still work. So XPath, like I said, there is nothing that CSS selector can do that XPath cannot do. There's nothing that XPath cannot, I guess, can do the CSS selector can do that XPath cannot do. You can always find a workaround. You can always find ways to deal with the same way. That the difference is how clean that is. Look how clean that is versus how it looks like. It's kind of gets a little bit confusing sometimes. Like in this case, XPath doesn't even require you to put a single quote or double quote, right? So it becomes easier for you to deal with, and it's easier to read when you have your task cases in automated pretty much. So these three things in CSS selector, as long as you remember these three things, you will never be stopped. You will never have issues on automating an application. Okay, just remember that. Now, aside from that, I would like to go a little bit more deeper and tell you guys like how to find elements that may be beyond these situations, right? So as you can see, the second one, like this was the first one that I gave you an example. The second one that, and as an example, is that you combine multiple class names, class 1, class 2, and you have to put dot front of that in order to make that as a CSS selector. Same thing, right? These three is covered. ID, we're putting a hashtag in front of it, and it's becoming a CSS selector. And selects all element. We already talked about this. This is true for XPath as well. Element itself is P. P doesn't need a dot in front of it. P is what is a as a tag. So anytime you are doing a tag, for example, in this case, what is the tag? Div. Div, you can simply put div, right? Like just like this, and now all the divs are selected. And now in here, I can say ID is equal to, like, for example, like this one, this guy. And now it still will work. You see, it's selecting. This is div doesn't need anything, right? So you just simply identify by its tag name, and this is how you identify that. You can also use like the class name div and that class name, just like this div dot the class name, it will work too. So let's give you an example. For example, that okay, so this is a div and an ID, right? We already did that right here. So we can do div dot something. Let's find a class name here. Where is the class? Let's see. So this is not even a div, but this is a class name. So div dot, I'm going to take one class name from here, because it has three class names. Div dot this, and boom, it is selecting this specific button. Okay, as you can see. Okay, so this is how you use CSS selector. But again, there is a lot of reading for you to do. There's a lot of things that you can do with Selenium, sorry, the CSS selector. And as far as goes first child, second child, third child, I mean, CSS selector has so much, and it's easier for you to use compared to XPath. And it's pretty much giving you a list how to use things. We will probably need one day just to learn CSS selector. So at least to begin with, writing our test cases, we're going to go into that, but we're going to pretty much reference this anytime you are using CSS selector. So at work, you're using CSS selector, your selector is not working, you come here and see what functions that you can actually use, what selectors that you can actually use in order to create a nice CSS selector. And this is your cheat sheet, let's say. All right. With that said, I don't want to go too much deeper in CSS selector, because as you can see, if I focus on one at a time and give you guys example, it will take a very long time. But I wanted to focus at least the first several. As a tester, we don't need everything. But at sometimes you're going to see you're coming in here and seeing that if you can use something from here. But as a tester, the first 4 or 5 will do for us, right? We will be able to automate without having any problem. But you're going to say, wait a minute, but what about the rest? What about the rest of it, right? The rest of it is because, remember, as a developer, as somebody who does front-end development, they use CSS selector all the time, right? In order to make it look different colors, different, like, for example, I want to make this button as a different color, right? And if I want to make it as a different color, I can do that by changing its color by different, looking at the attribute, right? So in this case, you see button.success. If I remove this button.success, it will change the color of it. I can also change the color myself. So I can say I want red, right? You see how it's became red? Like I can say I want it to blue. You see how I'm changing it to blue. And not only that, I can probably add a background color. Let me go into this button.primary. This is this button, okay? So button.primary is blue, and let's change it to red, okay? Okay, this is a background border, okay. It's not changing because, let me see, 1 second, I gotta go into this. So this is our button. Let me just go ahead and remove this. Let's show you guys how to change this stuff. This came from this. Okay, background color is red. Okay, I just want to see which, because sometimes CSS can be overwritten. So even though this is the attribute and value that we're selecting, it can be overwritten to be a different color. So as you can see, these are overwritten. When you see like marked out like this, that means it's overwritten. So it looks like this is where it is, right? So if I change this to, oh no, this is for inside. This is for inside buttons. Like this is just for the border for each text. This is the border color. So I'm going to change that to also red. So as you can see, border color has changed right here. Okay. Then if we go up, and this is the background image. Okay. So background image color can be changed if we need to. And then, okay, now this is being overwritten. So something is overriding our colors because this is how they wrote, as you can see, how it looks now. We can even do green, however we want, right? You know, this is how we can do it. So somebody who styled it, right, and designed it, they pretty much use this CSS selector to know exactly what needs to be changed. Like, to give you a better example, look at the header. This is your header, right? Right now the header is white. How do I know? It's right there. Hold on a second, not this new. Okay, navigation wrapper, right? Nav wrapper. I can add some other color if I need to, but I can also change directly. Okay. And this is the one. What if I want to change the, like, for example, instead of text, I can change anything really, text, color, or just color, right? Just color will do text, right? And then I want to, instead of black, I want to do blue. Boom, and it probably changed it to blue right here. As you can see, I can do border. I can add many attributes as I like. Border, and I can say blue, right? And it'll keep on adding this element. Somewhere it added it, it's just that it's hard to see it for you guys. But you can keep on adding this, but this is the selector. They're using the selector for making this different color, different style, and how they want to design this application. Okay, so when you see CSS selector, it's not designed for testers, but we use it for what? For our automation. We can still target a specific element. The web developers, they target this element by CSS selector in order to change the color. But we as a tester, we target the same element in order to do some actions and then see the outcome of that action. Okay, so hope that clarified a little bit. The homework will be look into the CSS selector. And also remember last time we gave you to automate, choose one and automate just the first 2 pages. This time I want to see the entire end-to-end process. So if you choose, for example, earthquake, right, and then I want you to go through the whole thing at the end of the summary page and validate that you have reached the summary page after submitting the request or submitting this application. Okay, so that will be your homework. I've seen a lot of people did completed, and there are a few that didn't complete. So today's class wanted to just cover the selectors or the locators, just to make you guys more enabled in order to automate. But in the future, we're going to go in and write more automated tests. I'm going to give you guys some few pop quizzes just to make sure that everybody's engaged, because again, just understand this, you're remote at home and you may or may not be paying attention, right? You could be looking at your phone or something else, which is fine, but we have to enforce it in order to make sure that you are pretty much focusing, because otherwise you will not learn and looking at the video, trust me, it doesn't work. You can be watching the video later on and you will not be focused, right? So we'll be more engaged in the future classes. Today, this is it. If you guys, I will say, it's Sunday, so let's not even go through the question session. Just enjoy your Sunday and just remember the homework. Go through the whole, choose one of these and go through the whole entire process and finish the whole thing. Next class, I am going to give you guys 1 minute each to show me what you did, okay, instead of you. So you're going to be sharing your screen, showing me and guiding me through your code and show me that this is how it works. You run your test. If it works, it's good. But if you don't show me, that means you didn't do it. We're going to then pretty much take the names that didn't do it, and then we're going to talk separately. All right, that sounds good. And I will see you guys next Saturday, Sunday.
I love this.